Chapter 10. First Day. As Mogun waited at the entrance to the stadium, he idly played with the token tied around his neck. Rectangle in shape, it was roughly half the size of his palm and had the characters "New Star" engraved on its surface. Every competitor in the tournament had been allocated one, and it acted as their invitation to take part in the contest. In total, 108 tokens had been issued, with each recipient having been carefully screened to ensure that they represented the very best of the Empire's martial prowess. However, like in life, not all of them were created equal, with the 108 tokens being divided into 4 classes, those being jade, gold, silver, and bronze. From rarest to most common, they consisted of 8 jades, 16 golds, 32 silvers, and finally 52 bronzes. Many privileges had been afforded to the upper 2 classes, such as being exempt from the preliminary fights that made up the opening few days of the tournament, and not needing to take part in the pre-competition parade, where the lower 2 classes were required to walk around the stadium like livestock at a cattle market. As a middling power, the Bleeding Sword Academy had been allocated a silver token, resulting in Mogun's current predicament. Mentally, he had shrugged off the situation, his ego not so fragile as to be bruised by the indignation. All around him, the other competitors waited in silence, some fidgeting with their clothes, while others looked around nervously, but no one dared to make a noise for fear of bringing shame to themselves and the institutions or families that they represented. Finally, the gong signaling the beginning of the tournament was struck and the stadium's gates swung open. A moment later, the waiting silver and bronze token holders shuffled forward, their timid footsteps reminiscent of the livestock that Mogun had a moment ago equated them, and himself too. From her private box on the uppermost tier of the stadium, Chu Chen activated her mage sight and studied the entering parade. To her magically enhanced vision, the multitudes of auras sparkled like pebbles in a stream. Yet as dazzling as the sight was, there was one aura in particular that she was looking for. She quickly found what she was searching for, because although Mogun's aura did not shine the brightest, it was the most unique. If she had to describe it in one word, then that word would be deep. Like an undiscovered pearl, Mogun's aura was hidden deep within an unassuming shell, easily dismissed by the casual observer, but fascinating to those who knew how to spot the telltale signs of the hidden treasure within. Unable to contain her excitement, Chu Chen shot to her feet and waved fanatically at her friend. Mogun must have been studying the stadium with his own mage sight, for despite the great distance between them and the sea of people around them, he caught her gesture and waved back. Someone coughed nearby, but Chu Chen ignored them, her attention solely focused on her friend as he continued making his way around the stadium, while all the while waving back to her. Having had his cough ignored, Feng made to physically restrain his daughter from her unbecoming behavior, but was himself restrained by a hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw Qing Yi staring down at him, her lips smiling, but her eyes stern. For a moment, husband and wife locked eyes, until finally the former dropped his gaze and settled back into his seat, leaving their daughter alone. With her husband suitably cowed, Qing Yi removed her hand and looked towards the young man who had captivated her daughter's attention. Mogun was a familiar face to her, for she had watched him many times escorting Chu Chen home from their daily excursions, and had formed a favorable impression towards him. Now, looking at him through her own enchanted vision, which was as far above Chu Chen's as a mountain peak was above the sea floor, she could see into his very soul, and what she found there made her heart ache. Foremost among all things was his love for life and an obsessive compulsion to learn as much about it as he could. Coupled with this drive was his formidable intellect, which allowed him to soak up knowledge like a sponge, then analyze what he had learned with startling clarity before internalizing everything to further his self-growth. Next came his integrity. If his love for life was the torch that lit his path, then his integrity was what kept him on the right path. Forming the backbone of Mogun's psyche was a strong sense of natural justice that compelled him to defend the weak from the wicked strong. And it was this compulsion that fed into his drive to learn. For the more he knew, the more people he could protect, creating a positive, self-sustaining loop. These two aspects of his personality had earned him Qingyi's respect, but it was the third thing that truly endeared him to her. For his twin pillars of love and integrity were built on a foundation of trauma, so strong that it scarred him to his very essence. With her insight, she could see there had been a time when he had been weak and helpless, unable to fight back against the strong who could decide his fate on a whim. While most people would have broken under such distress, he had used it as fuel for his growth, determined to never let himself be so vulnerable ever again. Given his young age, Mogun must have experienced this trauma early on in his childhood, and for a child to have gone through what he had and not be broken by it had tugged at her heartstrings, making her want to reach out and help him rise to the heights she knew he could reach. Talking about giving help, Chu Chen had sensed the imprint of someone else within Mogun's aura, someone who was infinitely more powerful than the young man, and with whom he had a deep connection too. This person was obviously Mogun's master, the mysterious hidden elder of Bleeding Sword Academy, who had arrived with him to the city. Chu Chen had her suspicions as to who this person might be, but at present she was content to let him remain hidden in the shadows. Taking her eyes off of Mogun, she lifted her gaze and scanned the few other private boxes that were on the same level as her own.
Uncle Pang!
Shouted Fei Yin as she stood up from her seat and waved frantically at the private box opposite her own, in a desperate attempt to catch Pang Xiao's attention. Not satisfied with her own efforts, she reached down into the seat next to hers and dragged a clearly unwilling Ding Tian to his feet and badgered him into joining her. Shiman smiled at his daughter's antics, happy that she was finally acting her age for once. Being one of the most competent junior officers within the Great Northern Army, the majority of her time was spent operating within the strict protocols of the military, leaving little opportunity for her to behave like the carefree young woman that she should have been. While some people might have seen her childish behavior as unbecoming of her rank, Shiman could not begrudge his daughter the small indulgence. Following Fei Yin's line of sight, Shiman activated his mage sight and studied the box. Like his own seat, the Pang family's box was located at the pinnacle of the stadium and was a well-sized structure, easily accommodating the family's retinue. At the very center of the box sat Pang Ba, who dominated everyone around him like a tiger among a group of cats. To his left sat a man who could have been his double, save for his youth and presence. While Pang Ba had the presence of a resting tiger whose very existence extruded power, The young man sat rigidly, his back straight and chest thrust out, in a deliberate attempt to imitate Pang Ba's effortless dominance. Although he had never met him before, Shiman knew that this had to be Pang Hao, Pang Ba's grandson and the Pang family's representative in the tournament. Shiman's gaze shifted to Pang Ba's right and lingered on the emaciated form of Pang Xiao. A pang of sadness struck his heart as he remembered the tragedy that had befell the man, and he allowed himself a moment to dwell on it. Pang Xiao had been a prodigy, maybe even the prodigy of his generation, and to have such potential wasted in so senseless a way was just wrong. Shiman's moment of melancholy passed, and he noticed Pang Ba staring at him. Smiling warmly, Shiman nodded a greeting, knowing that his counterpart within the Pang family would see it clearly, despite the great distance that separated them. Pang Ba returned Shiman's greeting, then leaned to his right and whispered into Xiao's ear.
So that's old Li's daughter. It's a shame she's so young, otherwise I might be tempted to play matchmaker for the two of you,
said the patriarch in a playful way. A snort came from Pang Hao, and Ba turned to look at his grandson.
Do you have something to say, boy?
Ba demanded, the warmth that had so recently been in his voice vanishing completely.
No, grandfather,
replied Hao, with his eyes fixed firmly on his feet. Ignoring the cowed young man, Ba turned to studying the stadium. With the Lis, the Jiangs, and his own Pang family in attendance, nearly all of the Empire's powerhouses were present, making this year's tournament one of the most exciting ones within living memory. A feral grin split Ba's lips as he anticipated the upcoming contest and how entertaining it will be. Lok Yip tried not to chuckle as he watched Hui San. The dean of the Bleeding Sword Academy sat with his head bowed and his eyes fixed to the ground, as if waiting for Yip to scold him for choosing their seats amongst the rabble of the stadium, despite the fact that the dean had had absolutely no say in the seating arrangements. Taking his attention away from the man, Yip instead focused on the passing parade at the center of the stadium, where he quickly found his apprentice, who was waving upwards towards the private boxes. For a moment, the light caught on the 3 semi-precious stones embedded in the leather wristband tied around the hand Mogun was waving with, and Yip smiled as he remembered the look of joy on his apprentice's face when he had presented the gift to him during breakfast. Following Mogan's line of sight, Yip looked upwards towards the private boxes at the pinnacle of the stadium. Numbering 5 in total, they surrounded the stadium like the fingertips of a gigantic hand. 4 of the boxes were occupied, one by the imperial family whose gold and purple banner fluttered in the wind, while the other boxes were taken by the Jiang, Pang, and Li families, respectively, all of whom displayed their own livery proudly. The 5th box, however, had neither occupants nor decorations, but instead had only 2 empty chairs, making it stand out amongst the other private seats. Yip's eyes lingered on this empty box with a wry smile playing on his lips, before turning away and refocusing his attention onto his apprentice.